Welcome to this SIMA Rama panel discussion about the documentary Tomorrow We Disappear. We're really lucky to have people across cities, states, countries to join for this discussion about this beautiful and amazing film that was released to the public in 2015 and released earlier in 2014. So thank you all for joining. I'm going to just introduce myself briefly, and then I would love to just pass the mic over to each of you to explain your background and connection to the film. My name is Neetal Parekh. I'll be moderating the discussion. I have a website called Innovate Social, which is all about creating tools, content media to make social entrepreneurship more accessible and actionable. I'm the host of a podcast called the Impact Podcast by Innovate Social, and the author of a book called 51 Questions on Social Entrepreneurship. My background is in law. I'm an attorney by training, but I've really been in the social entrepreneurship space for the last 6 or 7 years. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. For our audience, we actually had a little bit of a start on the conversation, and I think you're in for some really amazing dialogue about the film, about the impact, and about this ongoing situation. So with that, maybe I'll hand it over to Adam, who's up on my screen. So Adam, would love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey everybody. My name's Adam Weber. So I was one of the film's directors and producers. And my background is in filmmaking. I've been doing this for quite a while. I work in fiction and nonfiction. I think a lot of my passion projects are more about nonfiction storytelling and giving people a voice and telling stories and elevating issues in an emotional way that to initiate some sort of discussion. So I'm like thrilled that this is happening, and I feel really honored and humbled that people bring themselves to it. And I had the privilege, I guess, I don't know if I'll turn it over, but I had the privilege of working with Naveen, who's on my screen left. He's the reason why the film looks so great, him and a really talented team. So I'll turn it over to him.
Hey, I'm another filmmaker based in New York. Had a couple of roles on the project, so we can get into that later when it comes up. But really amazed that SIMA picked up the film so many years after it was released and able to give it a longer life, and we're able to talk about what's going on. So I think it's a story that people around the world can connect to in their own cities and towns and what's happening there. So I'm really glad that we're all here to talk about this.
My name is Amit from National Alliance of People's Movement. I'm a researcher there, and I research on industrial corridors and land rights and smart cities. And I got introduced to Kathputli colony because one of the person worked as a domestic help in my house. So I got introduced in that way. And I and my other teammates and other groups are working in Kathputli colony since 22nd December 2016. So we got involved with the notices of demolition and eviction there, and after that, for the last 1 year, we are involved there.
Yes. Hi, my name is Himshi, and I'm from National Alliance of People's Movements. Hello.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm from National Alliance of People's Movements, and I'm a researcher and in displacement, urban displacement and rural displacement, and the area of research is smart cities as well. I've been associated with the struggle of Narmada Bachao Andolan. Recently, the Sardar Sarovar dam gates were closed, and like I and Amit, we both are colleagues as well, and we have been associated with the struggle of Kathputli colony from last year December. For those people who have not yet received any benefit out of the project that has been introduced for them. So the case is still on. The case is in the high courts, and the case is going. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. So we are joined from with a global audience who may or may not yet have seen the film. So I can give a synopsis, or Adam, I'm sure you're used to pitching your film. If you could kind of give a synopsis of what the film is about for people who are just new to all of this. We'll be using these terms a lot. The Kathputli community will be talking about the street performers and the puppeteers. So maybe you can kind of set the scene for us.
Yeah, well, I can do that by way of talking about how I got involved in the project too, which I think is a somewhat interesting story in how stories like the Kathputli colony reach across the globe to me in New York City. So I read what at the time was my favorite novel, and in some ways is still my favorite novel, Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. And he's an author in the same city as I am. And when I read it, I came to the part about the so-called magician's ghetto, which the main character travels to. And this is a film. I mean, this is a novel that's technically magical realist, which means a lot of it's made up, but it's based on real things. And I was in this place of like, what's real, what's not, and I shared it with my collaborator on the film, and Jimmy, we found that this place is real. We could only find a couple of articles about it, but the limited amount of information we got was that there is a place in Delhi. There was some confusion about where it is and how many people were there, but it's comprised of traditional artist families full of puppeteers, acrobats, fire breathers, singers, dancers, magicians. I mean, the list goes on, and I mean, how at that point do you not, check on the website for a ticket to Delhi? So that's exactly what we did, and we did our research, and we connected with some NGOs, and we connected with artists directly, and we showed up at this place, and what we found was exactly what we read about. There was that number fluctuates, as everybody on this panel knows, I think, but that number anywhere between 2,800 and 3,100 artists' families in this small area of Delhi, and it was an amazing experience. And to get there and to meet all these people and to be welcomed so warmly, and then to realize and sort of dive deeper into the sort of human rights issues that were happening, the story sort of was triggered from there. And 3 years later, we shot almost 500 hours of footage and made it into the story of those years as we experienced them, which became this film. So hope that sort of triggers the people who aren't watching to take a look.
Yeah, and if I can add a little bit to that, so as a watcher of the film, it takes place, you get a glimpse from 2011 all the way through 2014. So I actually had a question for you, even just watching the film. Were you kind of with the community throughout that expansive time, or touching base with the community to get those stories and to kind of build that timeline?
Yeah, we had a lot of different strategies for staying connected over that time. Our first trip was, as you said, in 2011. And since then, we went back, multiple people on the team went back once a year, and we stayed between 6 and 8 weeks at a given time. And obviously, there was a lot of pressures on how much time we could stay there, what our budgets were for how to get footage and how to transport that footage. Some of the equipment we were using, most of it was rented. So it was a lot of logistics to try and maximize the amount of time there. All the while, we stayed connected with people from the colony in different ways. And and Naveen was going back even after the film was finished to gather photos, which we then released online, of some police violence that was happening. So we tried to stay connected and to the best we could, but yeah, come back here and work on the film in the meantime, and then go back. It was sort of that process until late 2013, early 2014.
And something that kind of really kind of took me in a pleasant way by surprise was that it's a documentary, but because you're dealing with magic and this kind of art, there's a lot of artistry in the film, like the way that the artists are shown and their craft is shown. You know, there's the fire. I think that there's that scene with the fire. I think that's in the trailer as well. And there's another scene later on with, I think it's this Rehman's son maybe, playing with the masks, and you just see this like generational art being kind of passed on, and you kind of get the sense of the time of this. And that's just to take a little bit of a step back from what I understood from the film and research, that this community has been living in this exact plot of land for over 5 decades. And so it kind of has informed the way of life, the way that the different you know, things are created, the puppets are made, and the, you know, everything. And so it's not where they live is not a small part of their art. It's kind of become an integral part of the art as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just to jump on the heels of that, these artists were, you know, they're itinerant artists, and they used to travel from place to place and carry stories, traditional cultural stories, folklores, and it used to be this sort of unifying force of how stories are shared, and cultures are passed through different areas of India that are separated by, you know, language and lots of open space. And so when, you know, TV and other forms of entertainment sort of came out, they naturally started to settle in a nearby, on the outskirts of a nearby city where there wasn't much there at the time. And and once they started settling and making semi-permanent homes, which became permanent homes, they created it in the image of how they live. And so the big open rooftops that we shot a lot on, where there could be big puppets built, and those are sort of the details that we wanted to show in the film and get, hopefully trigger some sort of an emotional response, so you can see what it means to take those things away and what happens to a culture there. And a lot of those things are overlooked when, you know, cities make a master plan of what a new modern city looks like, and a lot of these things are overlooked. So we were just hoping to show maybe what could be lost in that transition.
And then Yunji and Amit. So we're introduced to these different individuals, Puran, Rehman, Maya, Dilip, who are these integral members of this community. And what our antagonists maybe in the film and the story is that there is this massive complex. They called it the largest high-rise, I think, in Delhi coming up. So at what point did this become a clear human rights situation that that the National Alliance kind of became involved in, and that you both became involved
in?
Yeah.
So basically, okay, answer.
Yeah, MC, you start.
So basically, the point, I'll say the trigger, which was there, was that in the whole project, which is a so-called project for the people of Kathputli colony and their development, introduced by the central government of India, there's no say of the people in that project. There's no consent of the people in that project. The development that has been called for the people, there's no consent at all. They were not asked for that development, whether they want it or not. And it's like there are different policies on which these projects are implemented and made. But these people were kept in dark, and the government, they had a dealing with the builders under the public-private partnership model. And after many years, the people were told that this is something that we are introducing for you all, and we are not even asking for your consent, and this is where you have to live. Aspect, because now we are talking about the Kathputli colony, but we are just talking about the Kathputli community. So there were basically 14 different communities in Kathputli colony. And in India, we call Kathputli colony as a mini India, because if there are people from different states, religion, caste, even tribal community used to stay there. So what about them? And what about their livelihood? These high-rise, these skyscrapers are not meant for these people, because a rag picker cannot stay in a flat. They need a space to pick up their garbage and recycle it. And so the other people, like who used to make puppets, so they need space to do all that. So while drafting these plans for the people of Kathputli colony, there was many such things, like one of the factor is livelihood, were not considered at all. And this was the trigger that made people start resisting. They started resisting against the plan. And that was the point when we also got introduced to the situation, because it's clearly a human right violation. And not exactly the human right violation, but also the violation of the policies, the so-called policies which are made for development of these people. So that was the time when we got introduced to the Kathputli colony.
I just want to add few points, like when even the consultants were called for the project plan development, the consultants were arrived at the number of houses very arbitrarily, 2,800, not on the basis of any survey of the how many families are living there, not on any on the basis of any consultation with the public. So the number they arrived at, that is 2,800, is also very fictitious. And also the livelihood issues are very, very important in this community, because the communities are mixed, not a very homogeneous, but a heterogeneous community, and everybody has different need and different livelihood for their survival. And when a person live in the slums, it more than the housing, the livelihood is more of a concern. Like as she said, that a puppeteer need a space, open space for drying up their puppets, and also for practicing it, the culture. And the magician need a different kind of settings, and acrobats needs different kind of settings. So apart from these, the different communities, like the waste pickers communities and segregators, need a very large open space for their livelihood. And there are also domestic workers from that places, construction workers, and rickshaw drivers, and other communities who are living in the Kathputli colony and depending upon the nearby areas. So when we decide something so-called as an in situ redevelopment plan, and when we are seeing it in the 2017, some of the people are being coerced in a in situ redevelopment at Kathputli colony, 2,800 families, and for around 500 families are relocated 33 kilometers away from the site. So the livelihood issues are gone. For them, it's either or question. Either they can leave or live with the houses, or they can get employment without houses, because their employment depends on the vicinity of the area. depends upon the people of nearby areas of Kathputli colony. So it's also a very democratic question that how the policies are framed, whether the policies are framed to include people or exclude people, or for making spaces for richer section and elite section. So while making cities, it is a question of democracy also and the people's participation. Yeah.
There's a line that I think Puran says a few times in the film. Are we poor or are we artists? And I was thinking about that a lot, because this is what, if you watch the film, it is like what you would consider a slum community or slum area. But these are, he himself has been nationally recognized by the President of India. They've won multiple awards. When they kind of talk about whenever India is shown, like the art is shown, the community is kind of displayed. But so it's like there's this tension, like, is this are we an artist community or are we a slum community? So I kind of now tap Naveen. Naveen, you're in this unique space of being an editor of 500 plus hours of film. Adam, maybe I gather maybe you don't speak Hindi exactly, so I think I read in an interview that I was actually a positive, because you could kind of blend in and just have the conversations happen. But that also creates a different, how do you tell a story when there's you're relying on captioning, and also trying to tell other ways to kind of connect with your audience. So Naveen, as an editor on the film, how were you able to kind of bring in all of this, plus this whole impact piece, like where the impact and the kind of advocacy was such a central part of the film as well?
Well, I think it kind of started actually the way we shot it and filmed it. That's where it kind of began. We recognized immediately kind of the impact the story could have, like exactly what you said, based off of Puran's line of, are we artists, are we poor people? And for us, it's an issue that we deal with so much even here. People not necessarily valuing the process in which art is created. And we immediately felt that once we arrived at the colony and realized the kind of state that they're in. And I think one of the things that we really felt emotional about was Maya's character, because she really exemplifies kind of living and teetering on that fence of understanding that they can't live in that situation. It's not necessarily the best of situations for kids to grow up in. And she wanted to always look forward. And for us, we really tried to focus on capturing not only Puran's side of the story and kind of the immediate, yes, these are artists and they're extolled by the country when they need to show off its culture and traditions, but also understand the nuance that some of the younger generation has felt. And especially for me, like being in touch with some of Puran's grandkids, even now, I'll sometimes text them and see what's going on. Their perspective is so interesting because they seem just also very confused and not knowing, how society views them. And if the society that they live in doesn't really uphold their art the way that it used to, when Puran was growing up, then they're not going to continue learning how to create puppets. They're not going to continue acrobats. They're not going to continue, learning magic. They're not going to see value in that. So I think for us, it was really trying to plug into that nuance and tell the story from, multiple generations.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
No, but go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, it's so interesting. I spent years thinking about that line, and I think you're exactly right to sort of point to that. It's a lot of what the backbone or like the heartbreaking aspect of this idea is and their story. I mean, film aside, it's an identity crisis. And I think, the Kathputli colony is a really sort of extreme example. But this is happening all over the world and certainly all over India. And I love that these issues are being discussed, because I think there are human rights issues here, and it's very much about consent, and it's very much about, getting into the legal documents and going to court and all those things. And I was just so focused, and I'm so appreciative that those emotional hooks in the film, and really just based on their stories. I mean, we were just there, they were talking to us, and for them to be going through this sort of identity crisis of what does it mean to be an artist anymore? What does it mean to be poor? And the subtext to both of those is they're still human beings that are marginalized by a developing city that doesn't necessarily care about them individually. So how do they factor into a large overarching plan to modernize, and what does modernization mean? So yeah, just to directly answer your question about like editing down 500 hours, it was extremely hard, and not because we had too much. We had too much, and like everything was good. I mean, there are characters that don't show up that are people who live in the Kathputli colonies that just didn't make it into the film, because we could have made 12 films. Every story is nuanced, and that's sort of what's a little bit disappointing to see, is that there isn't sometimes any room for nuance in these big plans, and we do what we do because we're trying to introduce as much nuance as we can, because there's people's livelihoods at stake. So yeah.
That's great. That was the question I was going to ask. I mean, you have so much content and you have to bring it down, and you really nicely address that. It's a difficult thing to do. I also think it's interesting that the film was kind of released and came out in 2014 and 2015 at a time that was a very different moment than now when we're having this conversation, where maybe we in sitting in the United States or in other parts of the world could say, oh, that's the other, that's what's happening there. And yet now here in our backyard, we are seeing communities that are not being addressed, or their rights are not being addressed, or there could be more done right here. So I feel like when I watched it, I connected to it, not like that's them and that's happening there, but that's it. It can happen anytime and anywhere. And how do we stand up for our rights? And I think that's why it's really wonderful that an organization is kind of stepping in. One question I had, and maybe this is from the legal side, is in the film, we see interactions happening directly between some of the leaders in the community, Puran and the president of the community, directly with the builders. And some part of me was like, is there representation? Is there a team of attorneys, so that we're not, that doesn't seem like a level playing field when you have the developers who have all the money and all the power dealing directly with the artists. So I'm wondering, was there some in between now, or now that you guys have stepped in, is there kind of more of a legal representation that is working on behalf of the artists? Maybe that's for Himshi and Amit. Maybe you guys can answer that.
Actually, I would say that there has been too much of division within the community because of the various demands of the people coming from different lists. I would say that these categorizations are done purposefully also, so that there is the voice of resistance gets divided. I don't think what has been shown in the movie, the documentary, is there anymore, because people, they are literally shattered from inside, because they don't have a home, and the demolitions have happened in the winter's time in India. So most of them, like apart from the people who have got a space to live in the transit camp, that too which is made up of tin sheets, the others are staying in open areas, either under the flyover or in the school grounds or playgrounds, anywhere else. So they're actually shattered from inside, and the strength to fight back is what we are also working on to revive. but that has actually lowered from the times when they were houses and they were fighting for the same cause.
Actually, in addition to this, like Nital, as you said, that the level playing field, the Raja builder and the state and the police forces are on the other side, and also some of the community members are now on the other side, hoping for the development, the so-called development thing. And the people, the representatives of different communities are on a very low power ground. So I think when we entered into the colony, there were actually very much division between the community due to various reasons, due to various confusions and various dreams shown by either private builder or the state, or the coercion or the fear of losing homes and the people due to threatening by police forces or states through their policies or their actions. So they gathered the voices after discussing in public meetings for almost 3 months and during the early 2017, and they united to fight back. But we can see even now when DTA, the state and the police forces and the builder, what can they do if they plan very nicely and in a very brutal manner? What they can do if the community are still reviving in a very initial phase of getting united? So they actually brutalized the whole demolition process, and in a 2-day span, nowhere in the country it was happened that 4,000 homes were demolished. It was around 3,500 homes were demolished in a 2-day span. So it didn't happen in the whole country in this very short period of time. And still after the stay order from the court, they managed to demolish more 500 houses and evict families by force. So you can actually imagine the power differences and these things. And we did try to unite them, tried to stand by them in their fight, because it is actually their fight for the houses and their livelihood and for their identity and for the respect and integrity they deserve from the government of India, because they have, every citizen represents the country, and they have done a lot in the past.
The organizers are telling me we have a few more minutes we're going to go over. I think this discussion is really valuable. I have so many more questions, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask them all, and you guys can just pick which ones you can answer. But here are a few questions. One is, I think one of the most important questions is, what can our viewers do? So I'll kind of put that out to you, and you may each have a different perspective as well. I know on the website for the film, there is a call to action button, so you can kind of let us know. Another question is kind of, where is everything right now since the film? And this is a spoiler, so if you want to mute this while if you haven't seen the film, it sounds like those houses that were there in the film are no longer there. So kind of, what is the situation? How are the individuals in the film? We become connected to them, all of them, and they each have a different kind of perspective. I know someone mentioned Maya, Naveen mentioned Maya, and she's kind of, in the film, is kind of saying, hey, change is happening, change is the constant, and it's moving fast, and how are we going to go with it? So that's one perspective. Rehman was kind of like, I'm not even going to go visit the site. I have no, I'm just kind of mentally processing. So I'm just curious how they're doing. And then my last question, and I'm sorry, I'm just putting this all in there, is this film came out to the public in 2015. And now we're having this discussion 2 years later. So from your perspectives, what is the impact of an impact film? By being able to use art and storytelling, do you think that it has given a different kind of voice and support to the community? And what kind of advice or tips would you have for other impact filmmakers? So those are all of my questions, and I'll let you guys kind of pick and choose which ones you want to answer. But I think that we want to also leave everyone from this conversation with something that they can do and feel like we're not just receiving this really difficult film and we're not powerless to, continue the conversation. So go.
I'll just jump because I think I'm gonna throw it to Himshi and Amit because they're on the ground, and I'm also interested in their perspective on what's happening now. As you said, a lot of time has passed, and this has gotten into the nitty gritty, and there's a lot of legalese, I'm sure, and there's a lot of people who are trying to help and having different levels of success and contradicting opinions on what is help, and different opinions, I'm sure, as we tried to capture in the film also, of what does help mean for different people, and do they even want help? So those are all complicated issues, and I don't want to speak for what's happening on the ground because you guys are really close to it, and I think your perspective would be great. But I do think the fact that to speak about just a quick word about what the function of a social impact film is, it's hard to make a film knowing you're going into it to be like, I want to make a social impact film. I think that isn't necessarily how I approach things. I don't, there's a little bit of like, I was born in America. It feels, I don't approach a story anywhere within my country's borders, or certainly without, that says, I want to make a story so that I can change a place. I think for me, even though there are very serious issues about consent and human rights, the function of the film for me was, I want these questions to be asked. I want this panel to exist. I want people to watch the film and look, I mean, I'm going to say something that maybe filmmakers hate, but like, look, watch 5 minutes at a time. Watch it on your cell phone. Watch it. Have your friend tell you about it. I mean, ego aside on how long it took to create a piece of storytelling, I think the fact that you're asking these questions means that there's something that film did to trigger that, and certainly it can happen in a lot of different ways. This panel just happens to be related to the film in some ways, but I'm just, I think to all the filmmakers out there trying to make films that have a social impact, I would say, tell a story of a person who doesn't get to tell their story very often. Tell a person's story and try and get as many people to listen to that person's story. Facilitate that connection that doesn't exist. I think the internet and online, the fact that we're talking across the world, there are great tools to allow us to connect people on the ground with people who are concerned. And I don't know where all the viewers are located, but create that story that can create those connections. And I think you've done something really important from my perspective. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think I'll just add really quick before Amit and she can really get into it. But I think even in our experience, when we were even there in India filming and we would tell people what we're doing, there were many Indians who were surprised at what we were doing. You're going, what? What are you doing? You're going to Kathputli, but there's nothing there. Why are you making a movie about it? And just us being there and us in the process of making these stories, and to the filmmakers out there, when you tell people, as Adam said, when you tell people what you're working on and the stories that you're doing, that can have a powerful impact and possibly change the way people look at things that are happening in their own community and not necessarily 3,000 miles away.
In terms of situation, I just want to say a few things, incidences. Like one filmmaker, Satyajit Halder, came to the colony one day after 7 or 10 days of demolition. He was clicking some pictures of the whole demolished plain field. So policemen came and hit him from the back and actually kept him in the DDA camp and police station for at least 1 hour and broke his camera and other things. So you can imagine the situation, how the state and police is acting in the colony and how they acted in while the demolition was going on. Now, about the legal case, I think Imshi can tell you more about this and the scenario of remaining houses and the plight of people. And I think what viewers can do is actually when these kind of arts and the setting disappear, it's very important to actually question the government, question the from a people's perspective. When you start questioning the government, it matters. A large number of people, if they start questioning the police actions, the raising issues, talking about the importance of different culture, different communities, and their work and their arts. So it matters a lot, and actually this is what needed from the communities living across the world for the Kathputli colony, I think.
Yeah, and also adding to that, when we were getting to know about the Kathputli colony in the very initial phase, we got to know that this Kathputli colony in India is the people from Kathputli colony are less than 1 lakh. So there are schemes in India which protects a particular community from being extinct. So basically, they come from that community. Still, such horrendous things are being done, and this demolition has impacted that in a huge way. And recently, there was a press conference which was conducted by few organizations and which had a huge crowd from the artists of India. So the participants had artists and filmmakers as well. There they decided to do something as a collective for these people. Right now, there's a legal battle going on. I don't think the people globally can contribute anything in that. But what can be done apart from that is that if the artists from different sectors can come together and do something about it. I mean, artists are more creative, so they have better idea of how something can be done for their own community. Will be a good start for contributing something for these people.
Great. Well, with that, we can kind of wrap up the conversation. Thank you all so much for joining and sharing. The film, for all of our viewers, if you haven't watched the film, it's on SIMA this month. So please see the film. It's if you go to simarama.club. And it's a beautiful film. There's amazing stories. You will feel connected to each of the individuals. And I think just a thought to kind of close this or tie this all up. One of the things that entrepreneurs have in common, I think, with artists is that you look at something and you say, how can we make something out of this, right? So even in the film, there's this beautiful moment when they're kind of receiving this difficult news, and the way that I think it's Puran at that point is trying to explain it or share his feeling of receiving this difficult news with the camera is to kind of use his puppet and kind of show how he's feeling. And it's such a powerful thing. And I think it's something that entrepreneurs also do. Like with social entrepreneurs, look at a situation and say, well, if this is the situation, what can we do? So maybe this is a call, if you watch this film, maybe there's an innovative solution that can support and further the art of the artists and also the living space that we haven't all thought about. But if, as you view the film, kind of put your social entrepreneur cap on and say, is there something more? Is there a low-hanging fruit that could be a win-win, or some way to support the artists to continue their work and feel empowered in what they're doing? So with that, thank you to each of you, and thank you to SIMA Rama, and yes, definitely see the film. It's a beautiful film.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Thanks a lot.